Good. All right. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see everybody here this morning. So if you have been with us for these last couple of weeks, we have been going through the family, the Christian family. And it's important to say the Christian family because the Christian family is a lot more different than the world's family. It's a lot more different than the family that the world will try to perpetuate to us in 2023. So we've been going through the Christian family. We started with just marriage and divorce. Last week we were on the wife, and the week before that we're on the husband. And this morning we're doing a teaching on the children. Now, if you look in your handouts, this is by far the largest section in this study, right? We have about maybe 2.5, 3 pages on this. So we're going to be splitting this up into 2 weeks. So we're going to go all the way to children need to be taught the art of living peaceably, which would be, I think, the 5th point this morning. So this is page 43. All right. Parents' duty to their children. So if you're there on page 43, children are the Lord's heritage. Children are the Lord's heritage. So heritage is your blank in letter A there. All right, letter B, parents, not school, not TV, are responsible to train up their children. According to Ephesians 6:4, parents are responsible to bring their children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. The word nurture means discipline. Now, I believe it's important to see here how children are the Lord's heritage, because nowadays children are almost seen as a burden, right? To have children is almost seen as something that's looked down upon, right? That's why they have all these things to make sure that you don't get pregnant, or if you do get pregnant, abortion is something that is a viable option nowadays. So we should never see children as something to be just looked at as a burden, but rather a reward, right? If you have children, that's a reward. God's saying that is a blessing. He's saying, blessed is the man that has his quiver full. Here it says, the fruit of the womb is his reward, and it's the Lord's heritage. Now, it's important also to say that God really emphasizes generations. So he has so much of an emphasis on generations. If you remember, we won't look back at every single one of them, but he does something in the Old Testament where he sets up memorials. I don't know if you've seen that, but anytime some significant event will happen, he'll have the children of Israel set up a memorial so that the children that come after them can see it, ask about it, and then they can tell them the story that happened in that moment. And all of that was so the children could see and know and remember the work that God did with their fathers. And they can just keep on passing it down so that the next generation is secure in the truth. If you have your Bibles, turn to Psalm 73. Psalm chapter 73. And while you're turning there, I'm going to be reading Deuteronomy 4 to just flesh out this idea of God really emphasizing teaching future generations and the generations after them. So Deuteronomy 4, verse 9, as you're turning to Psalm 73, says, "Only take heed to thyself, and keep thy soul diligently, lest thou forget the things which thy eyes have seen, and lest thou depart from thy heart all the days of thy life. But teach them thy sons and thy sons' sons, especially the day that thou stoodest before the Lord thy God in Horeb, when the Lord said unto me, Gather me the people together, and I will make them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days that they shall live upon the earth, and that they may teach their children." And with Deuteronomy 4, what I just read, just so I can repeat it, because I know it's not on the screen, but just so you guys remember what I said, it said, "Lest thou forget the things which thy eyes have seen, and lest they depart from thy heart all the days of thy life. But teach them thy sons and thy sons' sons." So not only is teaching the future generation beneficial for the future generation, but it's also beneficial for you. Because the more that you teach, the more that you act out the truth that you live by, the more it's going to benefit you. The more that you're not going to forget, the more that you're not going to depart, and the more that you're going to keep in mind why you're even doing this in the first place. Of course, it's for God. Of course, you have some benefits from it as well, but it's so the future generation doesn't get lost in the world. So you're there in Psalm 73. Verse 12 says this: "Behold, these are the ungodly who prosper in the world. They increase in riches. Verily, I have cleansed my heart in vain and washed my hands in innocency. For all the day long have I been plagued and chastened every morning. If I say I will speak thus, behold, I should offend against the generation of thy children." So what is Asaph saying here? Well, when you get the context of the whole psalm, and I don't want to read the whole psalm, which is why I'm pointing out these 4 verses. But when you get the context of the psalm, basically what Asaph is pointing out is that the whole Christian life is vain because he's seeing people that aren't even Christians prosper, right? He's seeing people that don't fear the Lord being rewarded, so it seems, as if they do fear the Lord. So he's saying it's almost vain that I'm cleansing my heart. It's almost vain that I'm walking in innocency and I'm going through all this trouble to follow God when I see these people that aren't even fearing God doing better than me, right? So he's taking all this in consideration. He's saying, man, like, it's so frustrating that I'm not seeing any fruit to my labor. But then all of it comes full circle and he gets the clarity of mind when in verse 15 it says this: "If I say I will speak thus, behold, I should offend against the generation of thy children." So he says, if I go through with this, if I let this just take me over, if I let this dictate how I'm going to live my life now, just being discouraged because I'm looking at people around me, then guess what? I'm going to offend the next generation. So our inconsistency, whatever the reason, offends the next generation. It causes the next generation to stumble because you are the reference point of what a Christian looks like. So if you speak thus, you will offend the next generation because of your inconsistency. Now, if you look at the next point there, it says children in your handout. Children require discipline and should be taught obedience in the home. This will take real character on the part of the parents. Children should be taught to obey without question and when necessary without waiting for an explanation. Obedience must be instant and without argument. For character building, parents should allow no exceptions to this rule. Now, if you have your Bibles, if you would turn to 1 Samuel chapter 14. 1 Samuel chapter 14. Obedience is necessary. Oftentimes in the Bible, you'll see this. Obedience is necessary from children. They aren't meant to govern themselves. All right, children aren't meant to figure things out on themselves. They're not meant to apply discipline to themselves. They're not meant to figure out the world by themselves. That's why they have you as a reference point and to set them straight when they're going astray. Genesis 18, verse 17 says this about Abraham. "And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham the thing which I do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him." Verse 19, "For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring unto Abraham that which he has spoken of him." So God expected Abraham, being the father, to command his children and his household after him to follow the Lord. And in Proverbs 29, verse 15, this is about disciplining your children, which we'll get into next week. But it says, "The rod and reproof give wisdom." And what I really want to focus on is the latter part of this verse, Proverbs 29:15. "But a child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame." So children are not meant to be, governed by themselves. Children aren't meant to be teaching themselves or dictating what is right, what is wrong, because a child left to himself is going to bring his mother to shame. It's going to bring his father to shame. Because children need to be taught what is right and what is wrong. That's just how it is. Now, because I want to give a balanced view on this, I think that we should be commanding our children. Our children have to be obedient to us no matter what. But I also think that there can be extreme or unreasonable restrictions that can cause one to feel that they are never good enough. And even times of joy, there might be despair. And because of that, rebellion can often occur in an extreme degree. Now, if you are in 1 Samuel chapter 14, go ahead and look at verse 23. Now, this is Saul, and he is having a battle with the Philistines here. And they are about to win the battle, or at this point, they actually have won the battle. Jonathan went ahead, had initiative, and he went into one of the Philistines' garrisons, and he ended up just wiping a lot of them out. And then the Lord came, sent an earthquake, and called the rest of the Philistines to scatter about. So that's where we are right here in this battle. The children of Israel have won the battle against the Philistines, and now they are in the aftermath of it. So 1 Samuel 14, verse 23. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle passed over unto Beth Haven. And the men of Israel were distressed that day, for Saul had adjourned the people, saying, Cursed be the man that eateth any food until evening, that I may be avenged on my enemies. So none of the people tasted any food. And all they of the land came to a wood, and there was honey upon the ground. And when the people were coming to the wood, behold, the honey dropped, but no man put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. But Jonathan heard not when his father charged the people with the oath. Therefore he put forth the hand of the rod that was in his hand, and dipped it in a honeycomb, and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes were enlightened. Then answered one of the people and said, Thy father straitly charged the people with an oath, saying, Cursed be the man that eateth any food this day. And the people were faint. Then said Jonathan, My father hath troubled the land. See, I pray you, how my eyes have been enlightened, because I had tasted a little of this honey. How much more, if haply the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies which they found? For had not there been now much greater slaughter among the Philistines? And they smote the Philistines that day, from Michmash to Aijalon, and the people were very faint. And the people flew upon the spoil, and took sheep and oxen and calves, and slew them on the ground, and the people did eat them with blood. Now, there are a couple of things here that I just want to point out quickly. First of all, this restriction that Solomon is putting on the children of Israel is a ridiculous one. It doesn't really make much sense. And the thing is what he put on the people of Israel was a burden. Because what happened? They had just won the battle. They just won the battle. The Lord said, the Bible says that the Lord saved them that day. And yet he is telling soldiers that are out in the wilderness that have just won this battle that you cannot eat any food. That is an unreasonable restriction. How are you going to tell men that are out there in the wilderness, that are faint, that are thirsty, that are hungry, that they can't eat food? It's something that really doesn't make sense. And Jonathan, not knowing, ends up putting forth his hand because it's just common sense. It's common sense like, hey, we just won this battle, so therefore I'm going to eat food. And he just did the thing that was natural, right? He just went, ate food, and his eyes were enlightened because his spirit came back to him. It was refreshed. Now, what Jonathan did, though, after that was bad. Right, because he caused everyone else to just disobey his father after he knew about the oath. That was bad on his part. But notice what happens in verse 32. Not only did the people obey Jonathan and see it from Jonathan's point of view, but now they're actually sinning. Because look what they do in verse 32. And the people did eat them with blood. And that is a sin. God says multiple times in the Old Testament law that you are not to eat flesh with blood. Don't eat anything with blood. But you see how they got to this point, because they were following this oath. They were following this restriction that when the time came that they were allowed to break the oath, or they were allowed to actually eat, they just went full extreme. They couldn't even wait, and they ate the flesh with blood. Now, what am I trying to say here? Well, oftentimes when you put unreasonable restrictions on children, it can often cause them to rebel. And once they rebel, it's extreme. It's something that is totally just out of whack because they have just been restricted all of their lives. Now, Every parent is different. Every child is different. So this is different for every single person. But I do believe that having an overzealous attitude can actually cause them to stumble. And in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 16, it says this: "Be not righteous over much, neither make thyself over wise. Why shouldest thou destroy thyself?" Okay, so if we're overly zealous, if we're overly righteous, if we're overly restricted on the children, that's going to destroy them, because they're not going to know what it is to have freedom or have some sort of mind that's able to decipher decisions, that's able to actually think for themselves. And there's different ages, right? Obviously, you're not going to treat a 4-year-old the same way you would treat a 15-year-old. But as they get older, the restrictions should lessen, and they should be able to make decisions. They should be able to face consequences, and they should be able to know that, hey, they are their own individual, and they have to answer for the consequences of their actions. Or else, when they turn 18, they might eat with blood. They might do something that is totally out of whack that they just have been dying to do because there has been so much restrictions on them since they've been in the house. So, next section, children should be taught to work. Within their first year, they can be taught to pick up clothes and toys. Pick up clothes and toys. I mean, it's probably a dreaded sound if any person is a parent here, or yeah, it's probably a dreaded sound when you hear the toy box dump, right? And you just hear all the toys tray, and it's just, I can't. I have siblings, and I just remember just hearing that and knowing, oh, they're up. Like, oh, they're up now, it's time to play. And I can only imagine that noise is sometimes a dreaded noise, right? Because they're up, they're making a mess. But when you teach them, I think, a works-based mentality where they have to go out and they actually have to work, which, here they're just picking up toys and clothes. But as they get older, they can actually work. Working at a young age, I think, prevents a victim mentality, right? It prevents them from thinking that they're unable to provide for themselves. And if they don't have what they want, it must be someone else's fault. Or it must be someone else not providing it for them. They don't really have the character to say, hey, if I don't have something, or if I want something, I have myself to go out and get it. And I think a victim mentality can also come with a sense of entitlement, right? They feel entitled to everything because they never had to work for anything in their lives. And that can be something that is very dangerous. That is a very dangerous mentality to have as a person, no matter what age you are. Proverbs 20 verse 4 says this: "The sluggard will not plow by reason of the cold. Therefore shall he beg and harvest, and have nothing." Proverbs 26 verse 13 says, "The slothful man saith, there is a lion in the way, a lion is in the streets." And then in verse 16 of Proverbs 26, "The sluggard is wiser in his own conceit than 7 men that can render a reason." So a person that has a victim mentality, a person that has a sense of entitlement, one is always going to have a reason why they can't do what they're supposed to be doing. There's always going to be a lion in the way. It's always going to be a little too cold. There's always something where if the stars aren't aligning, they can't perform the action. And even when it says in Proverbs 26 verse 16, when 7 men can render a reason to why you can do what you're supposed to be doing. So imagine that. Someone that is saying, I can't do this because of X, Y, and Z. You have 7 people coming to you, giving you a reason why you can do it. But yet it says the sluggard is wiser in his own conceit. And that right there is that sense of entitlement. Right? That right there is that victim mentality where they can't see beyond reason. All they know is, well, I know for a fact that this isn't what I want to do, so therefore that is just what it is. I don't want to do it, that's it. I know this reason, I know that reason, but I don't want to do it. That's the foundation for where I make my decisions. And that again is very dangerous, because here's the thing, there will always be a reason for you not to do something. There will always be a reason for you not to go to work. There will always be a reason for you to, not do what you're supposed to be doing. There'll always be a reason not to come to church, right? When you wake up in the morning on Sunday morning, I bet you can think about 10 different reasons why it would be okay for you to miss church today. But that's something you're supposed to do. In Ecclesiastes 11, verse 4, it says, "He that observeth the wind shall not sow, and he that gathereth the clouds, that regardeth the clouds, shall not reap." So if you get someone that is always waiting for when everything is perfect, you're never going to do anything in life. Because life will never be perfect. Life will always have problems, and there will never be this period in your life where you feel like, okay, finances are okay, the car is okay, my relationships are okay, my health is okay. So now there's always going to be a problem. And that's something that we just have to accept about life. Life is always going to have problems. There's always going to be bumps in the roads. You just have to make sure that despite those bumps, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're not a sluggard that is wiser in his own conceit. All right, so next one. Children should be taught regular habits for happiness and usefulness. They should go to bed at regular times without complaint. They should have good habits of personal hygiene. They should be trained to be orderly and neat. Parents have to set the example. Any television watching should be carefully controlled and limited. Children should never be permitted to watch television apart from parental presence. If you have a TV, you must have a policy of zero tolerance for filth, profanity, violence, false doctrine, etc. The same applies to the internet and electronic toys. Now, God makes it clear that children can have reputations, children can commit sins, and God has even punished children for committing sins, which is why you need to sow seeds and teach habits when they're young. Now, Proverbs 20, verse 11 says, "Even a child is known by his doings, whether his work be pure and whether it be right." There's this thing where people might say, okay, where is the age of accountability, right? Have you ever heard that, right? The age of accountability. Where is the point where a child can actually commit a sin? Or where's the point where it's just blissful ignorance? And look, I believe that it's different for every person. Right? There's no age of accountability just set in stone. I mean, I was told when I was younger that it was 12. So as a 10-year-old, I felt like I got a free license here. I got 2 more years of this, But it really isn't. Deuteronomy 1, verse 39 says this, Moreover, your little ones, which he said should be a prey, and your children, which in that day have no knowledge between good and evil, they shall go in hither, and unto them will I give it, and they shall possess it. So here in Deuteronomy 1, they're about to enter the promised land, and the kids here aren't being punished because they had no knowledge of good and evil. Now, again, that's different for everyone. I mean, there are people that get saved at 6 years old, all right? And the reason that they were able to get saved is because they sinned. They had a knowledge of what sin was. They had a knowledge of what the law was. They understood their condition, and therefore they got saved. Some people at 6 aren't that enlightened yet, right? It's usually around maybe like 7, 8, maybe it's younger, right? But it's different for every single person, that age of accountability. Now, if you would turn to 2 Kings chapter 2. Because here's another thing. God in the Bible has killed children. So it's something that has to be taken seriously. The reputation of a child, the doings of a child. Now, I'm not talking about when, the Israelites would go in and invade different countries, how the children would often get slewed as well. Now, I believe that to be the reason because sin, it has an influence. It spreads. So children that are brought up in a nation that God calls just a totally you can't save this nation. This nation has to be wiped out. Children that are brought up in a nation like that, God says, hey, we need to take them out because when they grow up, they might just replicate what they've been taught. But here specifically, if you're in 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 23, this is Elisha, and he's going up to Bethel. And there are these group of children that are making fun of Elisha for being bald. All right, they're making fun of him. And he seems to take it very personally, okay? He went up from thence unto Bethel, and as he was going up by the way, there came forth, look at that word there came forth little children out of the city, and mocked him, and said unto him, Go up, thou bald head. Go up, thou bald head. These people are ruthless. These children are ruthless. And if you know about children, they don't hold back their tongue. If they know something or they notice something, they just say, oh, your breath stinks. Oh, you stink, He's ugly. They will just say whatever comes into their mind. And it seems like these kids looked at his head and said, man, this guy's bald. Go thou bald head. Go up thou bald head. Verse 24, and he turned back and looked on them and cursed them in the name of the Lord. And there came forth 2 shearbearers out of the wood and tear 42 children of them. So basically, these kids, they just came, they were making fun of Elisha, and he turned back, looked at them, and cursed them in the name of the Lord. Now, you just think about this for a second, right? These kids, this group of kids are coming up making fun of him, and you see these 3 distinct actions that Elisha does, right? He turns back, he looks at them, and curses them. It's almost like this, he's really premeditating this whole entire thing. Like, he's really like, man, I'm going to curse these kids. Like, these kids are going to get it right now. And 2 she-bears came out of the wood and tear 42 and children of them. It just teared 42 children. So God takes sins of children very seriously. Now, maybe, it was, I don't know the context of the situation. I'm just going to read it as the Bible says. There were just children that were mocking this man. So, we should never give a free pass for kids, right? We should never say, oh, he's 7, he's 8. Just let him do that. Just let him say that. Just let him act that way. No, God takes that seriously. They are committing sins, and they need to be told that what they're doing is wrong. I mean, if you never tell them that what they're doing is wrong, you are going to raise a sociopath. You're going to raise a person that is never able to see the wrongs of their doings. They are always going to point the finger at somebody else. And they're going to say, well, I mean, I'm never wrong. It can't be me. It has to be them. And that creates a very honestly, in the end, a miserable person. They're going to burn every bridge. You're not going to have anyone left because they're the problem. All right, so if you look there, and this is the last section we're going to look at, children need to be taught the art of living peaceably with others at home. No fighting should be allowed. They should respect the possessions of other family members, including their parents, and not take what is their own. They should be taught to share their property. They should be taught to forgive and to genuinely ask for forgiveness. I think the greatest example of someone that lived peaceably with others is Jesus. I mean, he had every reason to act out. He had every reason to, call his angels and do things that, we would see as permissible, that he would be justified if he were to just defend himself. But in 1 Peter chapter 2, Peter gives this example, and he says that Christ is literally our example. And listen, throughout the Bible, you'll find it. Like, Christ is our example. Christ said this. We should emulate Christ. So you can find something like this throughout the entire Bible. But what I like about this passage is that he lists things that Christ did, and he specifically says that Christ should be our example regarding these matters. So in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 21, it says, For even hereunto were ye called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example, that ye should follow his steps, who did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth, who, when he was reviled not again, when he suffered, he threatened not, but committeth to himself to him that judgeth righteously. So when he was reviled, and he was, given the chance, or it was looked at as if he had the chance to revile, he reviled not again. When he suffered, when he was beaten, when he was mocked, when he was just really treated badly, he threatened not, but committed himself that judgeth righteously. And that little term there, that phrase, but committed himself to him that judgeth righteously, that's it right there. That is what makes everything in perspective. Where when you're going through something with somebody, and you know that I can say something right now that can end this argument. I can say something right now that would justify myself. I can say something right now that might offend this person, but you know what? I'm going to commit myself to him that judgeth righteously. And again, I think that there should be a balanced view on this. It does not mean that every single time you can't say anything. It doesn't mean that there is never a situation where you can't stand up for the truth, where you can't say things the way that they are. There's a time for that. Proverbs 26, verse 4 says, "Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest thou should be like unto him." And that's kind of what we read in 1 Peter 2. It's like, just don't revile again, don't threaten, but commit yourself to him that judgeth righteously. But the second part of this passage says, "Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit." So what is it saying here? Well, it's saying to pick your battles. Just know when it's okay to stay shut and when it's okay to rebuke someone or reprove someone. Not every single time that someone disagrees with you, you need a reproof of them. But also, not every single time that someone disagrees with you, you need to be shut. There's a time to express your disagreement, and there's a time to just know, hey, you know what? It's better off if I just don't say anything right now. It's not worth it. Because if you reply to every single time someone disagrees with you, I mean, you're going to be miserable, because no one agrees with everything 100% of the time. So last passage, if you would turn to Jeremiah 28, and we'll end it here because we're out of time. Jeremiah verse 28. Because I believe that Jeremiah gave us a perfect way of handling conflict when we're both staying shut and when we're both standing up for the truth. So Jeremiah chapter 28, he is being confronted by a false prophet by the name of Hananiah. So Jeremiah 28 verse 2. "Thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, saying, I have broken the yoke of the king of Babylon. Within 2 full years I will bring again into this place all the vessels of the Lord's house that Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon took away from this place, and carry them to Babylon. And I will bring again to the place Jeconiah, the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, with all the captives of Judah that went into Babylon, saith the Lord, for I will break the yoke of the king of Babylon." So this is the false prophecy of Hananiah. This is Hananiah speaking. And he's saying that within 2 full years, everything is going to be back to where it was, right? Now, we know that eventually things are going to come back, but it's not going to be 2 years. It's going to be 70 years. It's going to be a whole generation. And then it's going to be Cyrus coming and reinstituting everything, not even King Babylon himself. So verse 5, look how Jeremiah responds. Verse 5. "Then the prophet Jeremiah said unto the prophet Hananiah, in the presence of the priests, and the presence of all the people that stood in the house of the Lord, even the prophet Jeremiah said, Amen. The Lord do so. The Lord perform thy words which thou hast prophesied, to bring again the vessels of the Lord's house and all that is carried away captive from Babylon into this place. Nevertheless, hear now this word that I speak in thine ears and in the ears of all the people. The prophets that have been before me and before thee of old prophesy both against many countries and against great kingdoms of war and of evil and of pestilence. The prophet which prophesieth of peace, when the word of the Lord of the prophet shall come to pass, then the prophet shall be known that the Lord hath truly sent him." So what I like that he is doing is, first of all, he's standing on the truth, right? But he's also finding something in the argument of Hananiah to work with. Because technically, Hananiah is right in the sense that eventually things are going to be put back into place. It's not going to be 2 years, it's going to be 70 years. But you know what, Hananiah, you're right on that part, kind of. Right? So he's finding something in the argument to work with. He's reproofing him because he's saying, listen, we're going to know shortly, because you're saying 2 years, we're going to know if what you're saying is true or if what I'm saying is true. And I love the example he gives, because he says, the prophets that have been before me and before thee of old have prophesied both against many countries and against great kingdoms of war and of evil and of pestilence. So he's saying, look at the track record, okay? There's more prophets that are like me than prophets that are like you. there are not a lot of prophets that are preaching peace. I would say the majority of them don't preach peace. You look at all the minor prophets. I mean, you look at Jeremiah, you look at Ezekiel, they're not peace preachers. The only time that there seems to be peace is when they're talking about stuff that happens after God's judgment, or they're talking about the prophecy of Jesus Christ. But they say, hey, there's going to be war, there's going to be evil, there's going to be pestilence. So look at the track record, Hananiah. There's not a lot of people like you, but there's a lot like me that are prophesying against countries. So that right there is a reproof, and it's something that the people can take in like, hey, that's right. Now look at verse 10. Then Hananiah the prophet took the yoke from off the prophet Jeremiah's neck and brake it. And Hananiah spake in the presence of all the people, saying, Thus saith the Lord, even so will I break the yoke of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, from the neck of all the nations within the space of 2 full years. And look at this. And the prophet Jeremiah went his way. So Jeremiah stood on the truth. He tried to work with him, right? While still staying on the truth. He tried to find something in his argument to work with. He reproved him by giving him a proof, just example that he's right and he's in the wrong. And in the end, when Hananiah was just still not listening, guess what? He walked away. Jeremiah just said, you know what? It's not worth it. I gave you what I said. I stood on the truth. You still don't want to hear me. I'm not going to try to convince you of anything. I'm just going to walk away, and we'll see who's right in about 2 years. And actually, Hananiah ends up dying before then. And, it's known that Jeremiah, of course, was the one that was preaching what was true. But how can we apply this with kids? Well, we need to teach them that, like we said in the beginning, no fighting should ever be allowed. Right? Physical force should never be allowed. But also, just know that every single argument is not an argument that you need to be involved in. Every single disagreement isn't a disagreement that you need to somehow show that you're the one that's right in. Some things, like Jeremiah, you just have to leave to God. You say, you know what, I'm not going to go back and forth with you. I'm just going to let God handle you, and I'm going to go my way, like Jeremiah said. And like how Jesus did, right? He committed himself to him that judgeth righteously. But on the other hand, we should never bend to anyone's will when we know what's right. We should never say, you know what, just for the sake of keeping the peace, I'm going to compromise myself so that we can just go along to get along. Those are two totally different things, right? There's standing on the truth, letting it go, but letting it be known, I don't agree with you, but I'm not going to fight with you. And then there's something else where you don't have a backbone. You want to avoid confrontation, so you bend to the will of the person you know is wrong for the sake of peace. You shouldn't do that. You should always stand on the truth. Job 27 verse 5 says this, God forbid that I should justify you. Till I die, I will not remove my integrity from me. All right, so that's something we need to know. We need to just keep in mind that you do not need to remove your integrity from you to agree with somebody else to keep the peace. If you need to compromise your integrity in order to keep the peace, guess what? This isn't a peaceful situation. It's time for you to stand up and talk what needs to be said. If there is no way that you can walk away from this position without compromising your integrity, says what needs to be said, but walk away. Don't keep on going back and forth. That's all it is. So we should teach them to stand for the truth, but also know that there are situations where, you got to just let it be and commit it to God. Understand that kids have a reputation. God takes sins that children commit seriously, and we shouldn't negate things or give them a pass because of their age. Children should be working to avoid a victim mentality and a sense of entitlement, and that children should always be obedient to their parents. They should always be disciplined and told what is right and what is wrong, but also to make sure that we're not putting unreasonable restrictions on them to the point where they feel suffocated and they're just looking for that space to rebel. All right, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you, Lord, for